Okay, I think we're good to begin. As I said, my name is Claire Winfield. I'm one of the conservators here at Conserve. A few sort of Zoom housekeeping things. We have the chat disabled, but Q&A is available. So any questions that you have during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A. I'll be monitoring them while Chris is speaking, but we'll sort of have some time at the end for question and answer as well. We do have captions available, so if you'd like to enable those, you can do so at the bottom. I don't think there's anything else in terms of housekeeping. Again, as I mentioned, we'll have time for questions at the end. But I wanted to introduce Chris Cameron, who's our speaker today. Chris worked as a sustainable preservation specialist at the Image Permanence Institute for 9 years. During that time, he assisted over 60 institutions with projects ranging from evaluating collections environment and mechanical systems to establishing environmental monitoring programs. He's hosted workshops on sustainability in cultural institutions and delivered webinars on a broad range of topics. Before working at IPI, Chris worked for over 12 years as a facilities manager for a major real estate corporation. He's a certified project manager and is trained in HVAC refrigeration. Recently, he became a certified energy manager as well. He has a passion for the cultural heritage preservation sort of field and believes that any institution, no matter how big or small, can have a significant impact on our carbon reduction. So with that, I will hand over the controls here to Chris. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Well, I was gonna say we've already covered a bit of the intro, so my next slide is less pertinent. Um, but I will say, one of the things, points I want to bring up, we now do some consultation through my business, Sustainable Heritage. But one of the things that this ties in with is not just about the grants, because when I'm not consulting, I actually am working as assistant director of facilities for a major real estate corporation still. So having that background still in facilities and kind of knowledge of I'm going to say the supply chain and the way a lot of those that's operating now also feeds into some of the things I'll be talking about for the grants. So it's not just, the grant end of it. And it's not just the grant end of it. It's also what does it look like when you need to replace a mechanical system? What's going to happen? So just want to put that in there as well. So going through the agenda for today, just a few things I'm going to cover on this grant. One would be gathering data. You're collecting data. What do you do with that data? Some case studies. I'm going to provide a few case studies along with the stages for those improvements and the timeline for what would be the grant path for self-funding. And then lastly, an overview of the grants. So an overview of different grants that are available, not just the NEH and IMLS that we all talk about, as well as at the very end, after I talk about the grants, I'm going to provide some, I'll say pointers. So if you're looking to apply for the grant, you're going to apply for that. What are some pointers that you might want to keep in mind? Some things you might remember. I'll say some potential errors that I've seen made, but I'll cover those when we get there to explain in more detail. So going right into it, you have data. Now, what do you do with it? So most of you use Conserve. You're collecting data. You're finding out. You're logging what's happening in your collection space. But I know from my own experience, there's a lot of institutions that don't do anything with that data. So you've collected it. You have that information. What are you doing with it? Are you using it to improve your space, or are you just looking at it? If you're just collecting that data so you know what's happening in there, it doesn't really serve a great purpose. Yeah, it's a great reference to on July 3rd it was cold there, but excuse me, one of the reasons we collect that data is so we know what's happening in our space and we can actively make those improvements. We can make changes based on what we're seeing. So one question to ask yourself in the beginning is, why are you monitoring? What are there questions you're looking to answer? Are there things you're looking to find out, or things you're looking to just understand about your space? What are you looking to change? It's good to know, excuse me, when you're looking at a collection space, or when you're looking at log collecting data, having an idea for what you want to answer. You bought loggers, you got a data monitoring program for some reason. What was that reason? What are you looking to gain from that information? And what spaces do you look to monitor? So there's different ways to look at that. Are you looking to only monitor your collection spaces? Are you looking to only put them in collection spaces and, your reading rooms, your study centers, conservation spaces like that, and get an idea for what's happening in collection only? Do you want to look at your whole facility? Do you want to put loggers in every room you have because you may have a room non-collection use that has a better condition than current collection storage? And we've seen that happen a lot. I actually have worked with institutions where we look at the whole facility and, collection storage is in one room, but there's an abandoned break room on the other side of the building that actually has better conditions that make more sense to maybe utilize that instead of one of your current collection spaces. Or you're looking at specific rooms, you got limited funds. You can't afford loggers in every space. So maybe there's only one or two rooms you want to look at, or priority rooms where special collection, a really special object is in. What are the spaces you're looking to monitor? What are the questions you're looking to answer with that? So data is going to allow you to make and track changes. So you know what you want to look for. You got the questions. I want to look for identify risks. Am I using the wrong temperature or relative humidity? And are there ways to do that better? This data monitor is going to help you do that. Are you looking to improve preservation quality of your collection spaces? Do you want to justify a new HVAC system? And you'd be amazed that your data will help point out inefficiencies in mechanical system operation or even ways that it needs to be fixed. I'll help you move collection spaces. As I said, you want to reorganize, realign. I'll give an example of that in a bit, or improve your organizational sustainability. So why would you look to improve your collection environment? So why, you're collecting this data, why does it matter? Well, a better environment is going to increase the longevity of collections. I know many of you know this, but the better we can make the environment, the longer the collection will last, the more we can increase the PI in our collection space and increase the life of our collections. Improving sustainability is also going to help reduce our carbon footprint, our energy consumption, and our energy costs. So we got, a win-win-win on that aspects. But we got to use the data to do that and then move forward with, some form of management or project to figure that out. And then also, with a good data monitoring program and having information or using that information properly, you can inform capital investment and strategic planning. You can identify we need to change this or this or this based on what we see in the data. So the data collection is the first step in that. So you're collecting this for a reason, and then now that you've got that data, you start to use it to move on to the next phase. Where do we go with that? And what kind of changes do we make? Well, things that you can change. So again, I mentioned sustainability. I mentioned improving the sustainability within your institution and the new HVAC system, because those are the two common things, but there's also improving existing HVAC system sustainability. Over time, mechanical systems don't operate the way they should and begin to fall off. And I can tell you honestly, I've seen mechanical systems from the 50s that work better than mechanical systems from the 80s. It all depends on, the techs that work on it and how they operate and what they do. But every system can be used to maybe tweak a little bit better. So maybe you want to improve sustainability. You want to improve a better building envelope. You collect your data and we realize, hey, we're pretty close to the outside air dew point and we got some leaks in the building. We have some issues with that. Or we want to improve our collection spaces as a whole, because as we're looking at that data, the collection spaces aren't exactly where they should be. So you got this, you understand where you want to go. You understand, the data has told us this. What do we do next? Now that you start getting that data, the next step is you want to go about making improvements. How do you do that? First step is you want to bring in some form of an assessor to look at these spaces. And you want to get an assessment form. There's usually two ways to do it. The first way could be to have you can self-perform an assessment. You can look through, go through yourself. Someone at your institution can look through and say, hey, based on our experience, we see X, Y, and Z. Or you could hire an expert, a third party. Usually this is the better way to go, because the issues that are seen with self-performed assessments is they can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You work at an institution, you assume the environment's bad, you assume that the conditions can't be met. So you kind of build that almost like tunnel vision where, hey, I don't think I can get there from here and it's just going to be a problem. The third party, I mean, I can tell you from my own experience where we've looked at institutions, and I have told people from the beginning, we looked at your data, we've looked at everything, and you're actually not in bad shape. You may think your environment's terrible, but it's not as bad as it is. There is room for improvement, but you're not the worst. I mean, I've walked into institutions and told them, you're probably one of the better institutions I've seen, honestly. Um, and you look at any of those assessments can cover your mechanical system. They can look at, the operation, the efficiency of mechanical system. You can have your collection spaces assessed. You can look at your building envelope if you have concerns over leaks of building envelope or issues with outside air incursion. Or you can have the facility overall. You can have a team come in that's going to look at your mechanical system, collection spaces, and your building envelope. And this is just in here to give kind of a rough idea for what to expect. And I'm going somewhere with this slide, but so a typical assessment is going to be about 2 to 3 days. So you're gonna talk to some assessors. You're gonna bring them in. There's going to probably be some phone meetings beforehand to get an understanding of really what you're looking for. But when they're on site, they're going to do an evaluation of your collected data, the data that you have through in your software, in your loggers. They're going to go through and evaluate the facility design information, look at blueprints, look at HVAC, visit the HVAC systems, and they're going to look at the collection spaces. In that time, or whether it's just in that time or you have an extended assessment, which you want to go over months and look at more data in more detail, you're going to wind up at the end of that assessment coming together. They're going to come together with a report. So the assessors are going to provide you a report with their findings and recommendations. And that's the key output of that assessment is going to be those findings and recommendations, because the typical assessment recommendations will come with some form of like 3 levels of improvements, I call them. And they may not be laid out this exactly like this in your assessment, but it gives you a good idea of what you may need to do for your space. So on a typical assessment, it's going to offer you some small, low cost improvements, like adding insulation. We have, one window over there that might need some insulation, or, an area over there that like insulation in 1 or 2 areas of a facility, like small insulation, or they might be implementing some strategies. Hey, you could work on implementing some shutdowns or some temperature setbacks that'll reduce energy. Things that are not going to cost much. So when we say small, low to no cost, we're talking maybe under $5,000-ish, or down to almost nothing, which would be implementing strategies. It's just the time invested in that. To mid-level improvements. Mid-level improvements are going to come with options like your HVAC system is okay, but you might need to replace the heating coil or a cooling coil, or maybe add humidification to that system. So these are, going to be a little more expensive, a little more time consuming, a little more invasive. And these components or these recommendations can maybe range probably from 5 to, a couple tens of thousands of dollars, maybe, depending on what those recommendations could be, maybe about, $10,000 or $20,000 realistically. And then there's large capital improvements. New HVAC system. You just can't get there from here. Your mechanical system is not going to do it. Maybe your windows are too leaky or foregone. You need to replace them. Roof needs to be replaced. And insulation. I know I mentioned insulation earlier, but we're talking small, no cost would be like insulation in 1 or 2 areas or a small wall or so. Major insulation project would be re-insulating a whole facility just to improve the envelope. So, you'll get an assessment report. So now you have that report. What do you do with it? So the assessment's provided you that report. The assessment's going to give you that report's going to be a roadmap for how to improve or prioritize what actions you should take for your collection space. So it's important to have that report, because that's what you're going to use when you're seeking funding, if you're going to a grant organization. So the report's going to include, as I said, the list of recommendations. It's going to say what you should improve, I'll say deficiencies, but issues were found in your space that they think could help you operate better, or may need to achieve better temperature or relative humidity. Recommendations for including improving the efficiency of facility, or even the sustainability at the facility, and even potential adjustments to the collection spaces. And I have, again, there'll be an example, worked with institutions where we'll look at a whole facility and say, hey, maybe this room and that room are not the best for collections. If you have the space, might be best option to move collections out of those into these rooms. So you get that assessment report, and there's a few options to do with it. You can use it to convince your administration to take action. Take that report, bring it to your administration and say, hey, I'd like to Well, we brought assessors in, sorry, and we brought assessors in, and we know that there's some issues. We know that there's some problems. We know our environment is really not as good as we thought it was. We need to do something to improve it, and they gave us a list of actions. And at times, administration may be like, great, a third party has told me this. Sometimes, when the staff at institution repeatedly tells administration, it can become, almost like that background noise, where it's heard so often. But having a third party come in and really break that down it can be very helpful. You can use the report, as I said earlier, to inform strategic planning. You're going to build a wing to your building. You're going to be doing some work to your facility. You're going to be adding something. That report will help, like, okay, we know what we'll need to do in the future to improve this space, especially some bigger ticket items. It's going to help that putting that plan together. You can also use it to inform preservation planning, risk assessment. If you get that report, and the report can tell you that there's temperature, relative humidity issues, and it's putting a potential for, say, mold. Well, I know ways that, by doing X, Y, or Z recommended in the report, I can avert that. And lastly, it could help inform fundraising or grant development. If you have that report, it's going to be in hand and say, okay, I'm going to take this to my development team and say, hey, you can raise funds for the new X, Y, or Z based on this report, or you can then apply for grants. And that's the grant side of that is what I'll go into next. Giving you an idea for the types of grants that are available, the way the grant program works. Sorry. There we go. So many institutions are going to apply for grants to fund assessments. So the assessment's the first step in that. And you can apply for multiple organizations will offer them. There's NEH that'll have PAG for small institutions, or Sustainable Cultural Heritage Collection, the SCHC, for larger institutions. IMLS, Institute for Museum and Library Studies, NPS, National Park Service. There could be a local programming office, state office. There's multiple different funding organizations that can help pay for maybe the assessments or different types of assessments to help get an understanding for how to improve. And I'll cover these a little more later. But always consult a program officer to identify it. Again, I'll bring that up. But when I'm going to be giving some examples just to give, what the typical grant timeline would look like. And I'm going to be using NEH only as an example. It's the program I'm most familiar with. I feel it's one of the more popular programs. So I'm just going to be using that as an example to give you an idea for what those timelines look like if you're doing assessments and you're applying for that grant. So again, I'm just using this as a timeline. And one thing I want to stress is when you're looking, everything I'm proposing or putting down on these timelines is, I'll say, pie in the sky. So if you're applying for these grants, and I'll actually go to the first slide and show. So we got a grant timeline here. This is saying that if you applied in this past January and you were received, I don't know how many grants they get every year, but there's a large number of grants that NEH receives or gets. You applied for that grant, you received it in one shot. Great. It was one of the best applications they've seen. And then you apply for implementation, in 27. It's, again, one of the best applications they've seen. They apply. It's this pie in the sky that everything's received. Everything flows perfectly. There's no hiccups, no issues. You may have to apply for a grant 2, maybe 3 times. So saying you apply in 25, it may not make it. You might have some corrections to make. You may apply in 26. You may have a few more things. You may apply in 27 and get accepted then. So this is just, everything gets accepted first shot, no problem. One thing I want to stress is preservation assessment to identify risk to the collection and prepare a roadmap. A PAG is the best program for higher level planning projects that result in a deeper dive into environmental issues or things that may result in specifications, drawings, schematics, and capital improvement. The SCHC, the Sustainable Cultural Heritage Collection Planning Grant, it will be the better one. But just explaining this slide a bit. So if you were to apply this past January and your grant was accepted, so you applied January this year, your grant's accepted, you won't receive the award. You won't be awarded it until August. So you'll be waiting almost 8 months, 7-8 months to get that notification. Then when you do receive that notification, the work cannot begin until October. So you got almost a 10-month period there before the work can start. Then if you're doing an assessment, you've got a 12 to 18 month project where you'll be working on that. So clearly you'll miss the next 2026 grant timeline, so you can't make that. You work on that to do whatever it is the work you're looking for, and I'll give some examples. And then you'll apply in the January timeline, the next January for implementation. As opposed to this is, institutions, if you decided you want to do some self-funding, you want to do a self-funded assessment this year, you do that, you work on that assessment this year, you'll be ready in 26 to, have your information together by the end of 25 and early 26 to get a grant application in. For sustaining cultural heritage collection implementation grant, you do need to have done some sufficient planning and collaboration with a multidisciplinary team to be ready to implement that. And I'll give some examples of team-wise towards the end to give an idea like who should be on what types of team and what you can expect or who you should be looking at. But I got a few examples in here I'm going to go into, and they're just to really, the intent of these is to give you an idea for timeline at your institution. If you're looking at potentially we want to replace a mechanical system or we want to improve sustainability, what does that timeline look like for my institution? So first one, work with a medium-sized institution that wants to replace their HVAC system. So the assessment's going to help plan mechanical system replacement. So the system is old, just couldn't get them the correct environment. We will look at this system, we'll make some recommendations. And at the end of the day, any recommendations we meet, they just can't get there with what they have. So the system needs to be replaced. So they'll have an assessment done, and then they'll look at what the grant timeline when they'll need to replace that. If we're thinking grant timeline for replacing a mechanical system, so just going through grants, so they would apply, if they applied this past January, or this past 15th, I believe it was, for the application, they'll be awarded in August. The work can begin. The assessment work, the planning work can begin in October. So then they'll go through, 26. If all the work is completed in 26 and may or may not, I've been on some projects where, they're just not ready come the next grant season, but when 27 comes around, they've got all their information together. They can then apply for the implementation. The grant's awarded. October they can begin, but when you're looking at mechanical system replacement, it's not work begins in October, let's start installing it. You'll get into multiple meetings and plannings. And I mean, I've been on a project for a HVAC system. There were probably about a half dozen, from the mechanical system designers to the installers to the suppliers, and everyone's going to have a say. And that could drag out for a few months, and then you've got actually ordering the equipment. As a current facility assistant director of facilities, I can tell you equipment is not, lead times on equipment is kind of unbelievable at this point. As an example, we ordered a set of, I'm working with an institution to replace doors on the front of their facility, and just these storefront doors that we ordered were a year out. So just keeping that an understanding, like 36-month is a realistic timeline. If you're looking at replacing your mechanical system, how long that could go out. So if you're looking at maybe having started this year, it could be 2030 before that system's in and operating potentially. And I mean, that's just even a whole different administration when you think about it. Like it's 5 years from now down the road. If you're looking at, say, self-funding that, just to putting it to an example. So if they had self-funded last year, they applied, they got all their information together, they did their self-funding in November, and then they applied January for implementation. They're going to be ready. They do the 36-month-ish, and they could be ready potentially by 28. So one of the ways to look at this is doing that. If you're looking at self-funding that, you can potentially kick it up, or I'm going to say roughly about 2 years. I'll give one or two or three more examples of this just to give different programs and what they look, not programs, but projects, what they look like, and to give you an idea of what those timelines are. And in those cases, you can assume it's about a 2-year kick up if you're doing it that way. And again, that's also assuming that all grants are received in first shot and like wonderfully accepted, great, everything rolls smoothly. So improving sustainability, this is a large archive facility that they reach out, they say, okay, we want an assessment to determine sustainable strategies that can be implemented. And that's all they're looking for. Come in and tell us what strategies we can use to reduce our carbon footprint and identify if our mechanical system needs any updates. We're not talking replacing the whole system. We're talking of replacing different components. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we need humidification, or we don't need humidification. We need to replace the cooling coil, things of that nature that need to be updated to make that system function better. So here, if we grant fund that, and I won't cover the old January application because it's self-explanatory, but they go through that, they receive in October, and they have an assessment performed. Assessment might not always get off immediately. If in October, it might take off a month, 2 months later. So say late December, early January, they have the assessment performed and recommendations are made for what strategies to implement. So they can implement shutdown strategies, implement testing temperature setbacks, fan speeds, things of that nature. And they'll go through a period of testing and identify components that can't or don't work properly. One thing to keep in mind is when you test any strategies with your mechanical system, sometimes you might let the magic smoke. And when that happens, you might lose a piece of equipment. I've worked with institutions that were doing fan testing and the fan drive just burned up. And it happens. There's some of these may be older components, and that comes into equipment that may need to be added to the implementation for replacement. So if we're looking at this, again, we go through that testing. So we're looking at maybe 27-ish to apply and then 28 to get those components. And again, that after October, depending on the availability of those components, that could be, a few months to a year out for some of that stuff. As opposed to, looking at self-funded. So if an assessment, if I worked with somebody in March, this past March, they applied, they did their strategy and testing throughout the year. They know what they need. They've designed that grant. They're applying in 25 and they'll be ready to, they'll be asking for they'll be looking to implement them if they get their grant in October. So again, it's that 2-year kick up. And that's really the best way to look at it. And, they're doing this on their own. If they're looking at self-funding, they can bump that up by 2 years just to help it speed it along if that works for them. So one of the last, I got this, and another quick example is evaluation of system operation, museum collection storage. So the assessment is to evaluate mechanical system operation. So your HVAC is not working or as originally designed, and it happens. If you drive your car, your brand new car today, if you drive it for 15 years, 15 years down the road, it might not be operating the same way. You replace different spark plugs. You're using, maybe different type of gasoline. Something's changed that's making that not function or operate the way it should. Over time, you've made changes to the system. The same with mechanical system operation. So I have 20 facilities techs that work underneath me, and one facility tech may change temperature on a mechanical system. One may come and get the same call but adjust dampers. One may get the same call and come and adjust the fan speed. So depending on what their thought process is, what they're thinking, what their experience is, they may change different function. And over time, that system will not work as designed, and it's got to be what they call recommissioned, where someone would have to come in and almost reset that system back to what it was originally designed, and ways to make that function better. And assessment would be provided. You would have mechanical specialists there, maybe even an engineer, to really go through and say, okay, this is what we would need to do, rebalance the system, get it back the way it should be. So I'm just going to show one. I'm not going to go through the whole grant timeline for grant itself, but just literally, as I said earlier, you want to think about bumping this up again 2 years. So if you're applying for this through grants, you'd apply in January. You would have the January 25, go through that process, have the assessment, and then implement the recommendations of whatever changes and adjustments to that system. And then again, apply for the implementation you're going to find things that don't work. You're going to find things that need to be replaced, and then put that in and most likely have those in 28. And as I said earlier, you self-fund that, it just changes it to a 2-year. So the last example in this is just simple reevaluation of collection spaces. Maybe we want to readjust the layout of our spaces, and we've done this for I've done this for a number of institutions, a number of universities. I mean, we'll come in, look, and like go through, say, 12 libraries on campus and maybe readjust the way they're laid out or readjust the thinking towards those. Maybe one space, the temperature and relative humidity just can never get to where they want it to be for a small special collection. Maybe that space can be condensed with another space. It doesn't make sense to run it anymore. And, or there better rooms on campus to do that. And again, just the last line on this, same as the previous one, you'll get apply for that grant, have an assessment performed and go through those recommendations. And then you'll go through the January implementation. So, you might be, 28 again before you're functioning with what you wanted to, but that would just be kicked up again 2 years. So depending on what the path you're looking, what you want to do, that gives you an idea. The purpose of these was to really lay down how those programs look. So if you're thinking how you would want to do it at your institution, you might want a mechanical system adjustment, you might want new HVAC, what those timelines you can expect to really get an understanding of how that's going to play out for you. And again, I want to make sure that those were kind of pie in the sky. Like I've been on grants. I've seen grants that have taken 2 to 3 applications to go through. So it does happen. So I'm going to go into some funding options, different organizations that have funding, as well as some almost guidance and some pointers when applying for funding. So I can't stress the first point of this. Many grant programs will help cover the cost of projects. The first point on here is important because I've seen a couple institutions try this. Funding is not retroactive. Your project must be completed after the funding is received. So if there's some program you want or some project you want to complete, you need to get the funding first and then go back or then go complete the project. There are no grants I'm aware of that are retroactive. Funding may cover some or all of the projects, and that depends. If you're looking at an assessment can be a few $1,000s, maybe depending on how many assessors and what you're looking at having done. Those can go, $10, $15, $20,000 depending. And that'll, there are programs out there that will cover almost all of the cost of the assessments, as opposed to if you're looking at a large project, say you want to replace your HVAC system and you're going through with a big HVAC replacement, depending on the type of system you have, those could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm actually on a project right now where the talk of the HVAC replacement was over $500,000. And I believe NEH, the implementation grant, goes up to $350,000. So it'll cover some of that and a good proportion of that you don't have to, but then you will have to come up with, maybe fundraise the difference for that. And a project can be used to fund further grant projects. So maybe you have assessors come and say, your mechanical system needs to be replaced, but you also have work that needs to be done to your building envelope, but also you have some collections work in your collection spaces. Well, you can, apply for funding to do the mechanical system first and then build off of that to move up the next step. So the next grant would be where we want to improve the collection or we want to improve the building envelope next, and then apply for a later grant that says, okay, we know we did the collection space, we did this, let's work on the building envelope, and kind of build off of the first grant. If you have any questions, by all means, absolutely reach out to a grant administrator. All of the grant programs that I'll discuss have grant administrators that work on them. They're almost all that I've ever interacted with are great people. If I've reached out on a couple of grants and they've said, hey, I'll tell them, I have a great idea for a grant. This is wonderful. And they'll say, yeah, that's great, but it doesn't fit this program. It actually fits this program. So definitely reach out to the grant administrators and talk your program through with them, see where they, if they have any pointers, they might make recommendations like, hey, maybe want to change that program just a little bit like this, and it'll fit better with what we offer. So before I go into some of the pointers on applying for a grant, these are some of the grant institutions. The first slide here is the ones that most of you all know about. The NEH, the big NEH and IMLS are the two big ones. Most institutions, most people apply for those. They work with those. There is also NPS. I know many of you use them, and also the EPA does offer some grants, not just for cultural heritage organizations, but just as for institutions as a whole, maybe even for commercial buildings. And many cultural heritage organizations, museums, libraries, or archives fall into the commercial buildings category. So you might find grants that pertain to your institutions. It might not say cultural heritage directly. It might just be a facility management grant or facility improvement that will fall through that can go through EPA. There is also your local sustainability office. Most cities have a local sustainability office. They're Some are very well funded, and they will offer different types of programming. They can offer programming. I mean, you may reach out and they have some funding, or they may have no funding at the time. I have seen one popular thing a lot of them offer, and again, maybe not the one in the city you're in, but one popular thing they offer may be funding to install variable speed drives on fans for HVAC. So it never hurts to reach out, because even that is just one less thing your institution has to come up with costs for, and just helps reduce the energy on your end. Some other, I guess, still well known but lesser known are grants.gov. Grants.gov is just a government website that lists all federal grants that are available through the federal government. So if the grants from IMLS and NEH are on there, I believe EPA is on there as well, or EPA and NPS are on there as well. But definitely look through, because there's always grants you might not know about. Grants you might not consider. You might type in arts and find out that a local embassy may have a grant available, and things like that. I have seen those, and they are available, and they do happen. There's also the Frankenthaler grant, which is a wonderful grant that I know a number of institutions have received. There are state arts associations aside from the federal government. Your local state art association may have some grants available, as well as looking at state grant websites. So I live here in New York State. We have New York State grants websites that list different types of grants available, not from the federal government, but through the local state, as well as local state granting organizations. We actually have a granting organization here in our city that typically tends to give out anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000 to some organizations, depending on what their needs are and what their availability is. And last year, they actually received a huge sum of money from a donor. I believe it was $200 million to help cultural heritage organizations. So you never know what kind of funds may even could even be just in your city that's available through some of these organizations. So I'm going to, before I wrap up, just cover some, or as I'm wrapping up, sorry, cover some helpful tips when you're applying for a grant. These are some pointers, but also some errors I want to say that I've seen individuals make when they apply. So first off is you want to get the right partners for your grant. So you're not going to call a plumber to fix your HVAC. And this is something I've seen happen a few times. You want to line up experts that are in the field and can speak to the work that you want to perform. I mentioned this earlier, but depending on the type of grant, if you're on an NEH Sustaining Cultural Heritage grant, the grant requires a collections preservation or conservation professional on each project. This person is going to be the advocate for the collection. They're going to ensure that the project is going to meet the needs of the collection. So they want to make sure that whatever they're doing is going to be working towards the improvement of the collection space. And two examples here. A proposal we just want to replace the mechanical system. So the project I talked about earlier, they want to replace the mechanical system. They had a mechanical engineer, environmental consultants, HVAC technicians, and a collection care professional on that team. So that's, just replace the mechanical system. That was our team. I've actually been on teams for mechanical system replacement that had about twice as many professions on there. So, and then even in the second example, the proposed project for museum expansion. So they want to add a wing to the museum. This is actually a short list. I have mechanical engineer, architect, lighting expert, collections. Again, that collections care professionals on that list. I've been on a team for this that had over, I want to say, a dozen professionals, if not more, where even the steel supplier was listed as a professional, and they had a say in the type of steel that was being used and why. Make sure you ask for letters of commitment for all these from whoever your experts are. Make sure you get that letter that says, yes, I'm working on this. I will be a participant in this, and state, what they're part of that project and they're willing to do it and the value that they see in the project. Additionally, get letters of support. So a former coworker of mine used to ask for more letters than they actually needed for it. So if a program asked for 3 letters of support, they would ask for 5. People's lives are busy. People get distracted. They can be forgetful. They just get overwhelmed at work and they may not be able to get the letter off to you in time. So always, if they want 3, reach out for a little more than that, and offer to write the letter if possible ahead of time. So draft something up, get something put together ahead of time for them. Send it off to them. Let them make some edits to that to make it a little easier for them or a little faster to get that letter off to you. So no matter how much of a slam dunk you think that application is going to be, that letter is just going to add that boost to it. And you can ask, an expert in that field. I've been asked to write a letter on a grant before. Just, hey, would you be willing to? This is the grant we want to apply for. This is our situation. Can you write a letter of support for this? Or even another institution. If you know of another institution that has done a similar project, it never hurts to reach out and say, hey, could you give us a letter that says, what the value was to you and how it benefited you and it could benefit us as well. There's also the value of your collection. So when I say value, again, it's not monetary, that has happened a few times. Well, my collection's worth, $20 million, so we don't want to lose it. Well, it's not only about that. It's what makes your collection important enough to warrant a grant. Why is your collection worth more than any other grant that's there? So you have the largest collection of golden harmonicas. You have the only collection of antique fire extinguishers in the area. What makes your collection different? Regional, state, national archive or collection from a specific group. Worked with an institution that was the only repository for a local Native American organization. So that organization kept all of their archive there at this institution, and this institution said, if we are the safeguard for this, we ensure that no harm comes to this collection. It's important to this group, and we want to make sure that we help that moving forward. Excuse me. Is this collection from a specific author, the only collection from this author, the only collection from this designer? And does it have a local or state or national significance? Like, you may be a small 2-person historical society, but you may have a major incident that occurred there during the Civil War that has national significance. That's important to bring up in your application. And one of the last topics be sure you address key points. Most grant organizations ask a similar question: how will this affect sustainability? So when they ask questions like that, make sure you're not vague. Make sure you're as to the point as possible. One of the reasons on having an environmental expert on your team is they can advise potential outcomes on your application. So they can advise, whatever those key points they're going to ask, and sustainability is usually a huge one. When they talk about sustainability, one of the, I'll say, more embarrassing, more frustrating things. I've been on both grant applications. I've looked at grants for individuals, and I've reviewed grants for programs. Don't say that you're at the end of this project will be more sustainable, because I see that a lot, and they don't want to know that will you be sustainable. How are you going to achieve that? What are the steps you're going to take? What are those processes? And again, if you're having that, any assessors that perform will have those. You can take that information almost right from the assessment and put it into your application. Like, we will implement these strategies. We'll do this. This can reduce by our an energy use by this mechanical system by 1/3 or 10% or 20%. This is, that information is key. How are you going to be sustainable? And if you have them, list those strategies. And a lot of times that information will be there. Other than that, I'm going to open it up to questions. Now I'll leave my information on the screen for the question while I answer the question. So if you have any, feel free to send them in, or if you don't want to ask it here, absolutely feel free to email me or reach out, or there's check out the website as well.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris. We really appreciate it. I have some questions from the chat. So I guess we'll start with the first one here. Um, Talking a little bit about money. I know that you sort of gave a range of um, what an assessment costs and sort of broadly what some of the implementation grants can sort of cover, how much things sort of run. The question was if I need to pay for an assessment before I apply to a grant to sort of show that we really mean it, how do I justify spending that money to try to get a grant for the institution? Or is it just not that expensive to get an assessment? So can you talk a little bit about like I guess some sort of cost benefit sort of thing with if I have to pony up the money to get an assessment, what do I get out of it in terms of savings or scale or that sort of thing?
So, um, savings wise, I mean, yeah, I was gonna say, let me couch this carefully. So the assessments will run depending on your assessors. I mean, I'm just ballpark average for two assessors. If you come out a collections person, mechanical person, to have that done, depending on the assessors, say anywhere from 10 to 15,000 ish in that range. Again, a lot of grant programs will cover that. A lot of that's their time and travel. Um, so they'll a lot of the grants will cover that. The benefit you get, or how do you justify it? A lot of times there will be recommendations in that assessment that you can implement that you don't have to go for applications for. Most institutions I'll leave there, we'll leave there and say, hey, you can do right now this. There are some things you can do right now that can make immediate improvements. Um, and it doesn't, unfortunately, it doesn't knock any money off if you're going for implementation at all. Um, that at least not that I could think of. Um, but the justification in that is you're showing that you're how do I put this? You're moving the ball forward, like you said. Show what we really mean. Um, you're showing that you're looking to make those changes, that you're investing in making those changes. Again, regardless of whether NEH is NEH or you go through any, regardless of whoever's paying for the grant. Sorry, whoever pays for that grant, you show that you're interested in moving, you're making those changes and um, making those adjustments.
Yeah, great. So when we're getting an assessment, say, I'm an institution, I think I need to get an assessment. Do I need to specify what I want someone to come look at? Do I need to line up my individual experts? I know, especially for the larger kind of implementation grants you were talking about, all the different experts. Do we need to do that also for an initial assessment, or is that do you sort of contract with one person who can sort of bring those people along or sort of look at your sort of current issues and say, okay, we need to do mechanical systems and space planning, and how does that work?
Always, one thing I'll say that is always talk it through first with someone. So, um, I'll have institutions reach out to me all the time and say, "Hey, this is what we're thinking. This is our problem. This is what we want to do." And I'm more than happy to talk through issues with anyone. I mean, it doesn't. I'd rather help you take 20 minutes of my time to work that out than gets the wrong answer somehow. And I'm happy, you always sit down with someone, and again, I said I'll do it. You sit down, talk through, this is what I want to do. These are our problems. These are the issues we're seeing. And it was okay, well, you might be looking for, I mean, I've talked to institutions at all and said, I'm not who you're looking for. You want to talk to this person, like someone who does building, really good at building envelopes, like Michael Henry, like you're out of my range. But you want to go through it and you talk those scenarios out, and there are times like once the assessments, like you have an initial assessment performed, I've gone through and like, okay, this is your mechanical system, this is this, you have issues at your building envelope that are far beyond my needs, and you might, so uh, um reaching out to the initial consultant and getting their thoughts, and most of the time it will be just the first initial assessment of your facility mechanical by whoever. And then if there's major deficiencies outside of their range, they'll tell you either you need to talk to this person originally, or once they find them, like, hey, you want to talk to this person based on what I found when I was there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So you basically start step one is sort of starting with initial consultant, kind of get someone in the ballpark, and they should be able to advise on sort of further directing the assessment and who needs to be involved with that assessment.
Yeah, and like I said, there are times we'll find things during the assessment that no one was aware of. we'll perform an assessment. It's like, oh wow, you've got like this issue going on, and like, okay, or in one of them is rebalancing happens a lot, and rebalancing means having your mechanical system realigned, the vents and dampers and all that readjusted. There's a lot of institutions that will work with and find that, and we're happy to say, it's not something that we do, but you should be in touch with an expert to help have a rebalancing system, a rebalancing mechanical system done.
Yeah, great. So I guess a point of clarification, because I'm thinking, if I'm a smaller organization, I'm thinking about, we probably need something like an HVAC overhaul or replacement and sort of getting ducks in a row, sort of leading up to that. After the assessment, is the expectation that the institution will sort of fix all the small things, start doing those strategies, before they apply to a larger grant to go after the larger things? I imagine that it would look more advantageous on a grant to say, like, I've already started fixing the things that are within my realm, but I need help with these larger things. And then I guess the sort of follow-up for that is, do you have any, obviously it varies from institution to institution, but if you're thinking about budget planning, I'm going to budget one lump for the assessment. I should also budget some lump to fix some things and then plan to get a grant for these sort of larger things going forward.
First of all, I absolutely agree with your second half of that. Definitely want to. There's always things that are going to be found with that assessment that just can't be fixed, or that just need to be fixed. Like I said, we've been at places that I've looked in. Well, our humidification hasn't worked in years, and then, well, all right, let's start with that needs to get fixed probably ASAP. But my God, I lost what was the first part of that? I apologize.
Yeah, so trying to think about budgeting for or planning to fix the small things before applying
Yes,
for
yes, sorry.
a large
Okay.
implementation grant.
It,
Yeah.
it does it when you're thinking about when you have the planning done and you're looking at going to the next stage, whether it's implementation or going to any institution, any H implementation, or go to IMLS, or you want to apply for the grant and say we had an assessment done, it absolutely looks good on the application to say, there was 20 recommendations, say, and we are already done 3 or 4 of those on our own. We've attended to this, we've attended this, we've started to implement, testing shutdowns, we're starting to do this. It shows you're looking to move that ball forward, not, we've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas. Show us which way to go. Like it shows that you know what you need to do and you're starting to move and take that action on your own. So it shows them that you really want to achieve it. It's a sign that you really want to achieve that.
Yeah, that's great. And then another question here about so we're collecting data, and I maybe think it's okay, but I'm not quite sure if this is how good my kind of environment is. Do you have any resources for people to sort of understand what are sort of best practices for collections, either with building types or with collection types? I know that there are like ASHRAE recommendations. Those I think are sort of paywall depending and can be, I think, a little kind of in the weeds for sort of more collections type people. So do you have any recommendations for where to go when you've got data, and how can I tell if that's sort of good or not?
I'll tell anybody. I'm happy to look at your data with you. I'm happy to take a half hour of my time, 20 minutes of my time, whatever. Quick calls. We'll sit down. I look at your data and tell you how I think it looks, how I think based off of. Always have some information, what type of building you have, what type of mechanical system. I'm happy to look at that. I'd rather kind of steer you in whatever direction you need to go, because there aren't. You're right. ASHRAE is paywalled, and it kind of sucks that you have to go through that. Even if you do get the ASHRAE copy, having someone who can really break some of that down. I had to read through an ASHRAE recommendation yesterday, and it was myself and another HVAC expert, and we were having debates over what ASHRAE meant in one section. That it says 68 to 77. Well, technically it's 67 to 78 to 85. And we just kind of went back and forth as to, so yeah, having an expert there to really sometimes break down what that means too can be tricky. So yeah, if you, for a start, if you want to reach out to me and say, hey, I have some questions, I have some data. I love looking with data and trying to help people because it's the first step to knowing where you need to go and what you need to do, and if anything's wrong. And I have seen institutions apply for grants thinking that the sky is falling, only to get the funding and find out that it's really, when we came in and they're panicking, you're really not that bad. You're really actually we're in a really good condition, but where there were some changes that needed to be made, like here and there, to improve sustainability.
Yeah. And then on the topic of sustainability, so what are some good first steps to start thinking about things like reducing carbon footprint and energy consumption, or resources where people can go? It does seem like a very, I think we all know like, oh, we should be doing this, but it seems like an elephant. And so how do we get to the first bite or sort of some orientation about either strategies or resources or sort of opportunities, low hanging fruit for starting to take steps in that direction?
One of the so the when I worked at IPI, we put together the guide, the methodology guidebook. Both Kelly Krish and I put that together, and couldn't recommend that more. It's a great place to start. There's two publications that IPI has in there. I believe they're both free. That I would absolutely recommend taking a look at. The first one is almost introductory to data monitoring, data logging. So if you're really just at the entry level, kind of the beginning steps, that's a good place to start. But then if you get into the methodology guidebook for implementing energy saving strategies in cultural heritage institutions, that's a great book to go through because we tried to put that together as almost a step-by-step choose your own adventure, if you will, publication. So as you're reading that, you can say, okay, well, I know I can go through mechanical systems. I can go through it explains how to go through mechanical system, your collection space. And then as you get on further, it kind of breaks down how to do the strategies and almost determine what strategy works for you. Our intent was that you can be able to do that alone if you wanted to. But as I say, I'm always happy to ask questions, or if you don't think, or you do those strategies and something doesn't look right, absolutely reach out to me. I'm happy to give whatever pointers I can.
That's great. And then we also had a comment from the field that thanks, Susan. She mentioned that one of the places that people in rural areas might look for funding for this sort of thing is the Department of Agriculture. So they have money for cultural projects. So that's something to sort of think about as well.
Yep.
So I think we're sort of at time. I want to thank everyone for attending today. We're going to have a recording of this available in the community. So if someone couldn't catch it today, we'll have that. Please let us know if you have any additional questions. And thanks again to Chris for such a great presentation. We really appreciate it.
No problem at all. I appreciate it.
And then one last thing, there will be I think when you close the browser, there's going to be a webinar survey that pops up. We appreciate it. It's just a few questions. If you could answer that for us. And there's also an option to add in any suggested topics or follow-up things that you'd like to see other webinars about. So if you've got ideas there, we'd love to hear them. And thank you again to everyone who attended, and we'll be in touch. Thanks so much.